Welcome back. All right, so now we've got some automation elements that we're going to add to this room. Honestly, at this point, this is all just icing. It's the icing on Patrick's turkey sandwich, which I'm sure is the spread that he most wants. Yes.
Blah. I also would love to understand why that graphic behind you looks so pensive.
He's
Like, what is he waiting for?
Well, he's waiting on the room to do what he wants it.
Oh, I get it. Yeah.
We're gonna make that easier. So there's a lot of things in this room that we potentially want to automate to react to the user. We're not gonna do all of them, but we'll show you some examples. Along the way, I'll show you how to set an item in an array. We'll talk a little bit about the .isInvisible block that changes a control to be visible or not, pretty self-explanatory. And surprisingly, we haven't used this already, but the AND and the OR block, the same as like an AND gate or an OR gate, a logic AND or a logic OR, whenever you need to validate if two things are both true at the same time, or if one or another thing are true, we'll use those blocks as well. Here are the things we want to accomplish in this room. First of all, we're going to automatically route a laptop to the displays when it is connected. So we talked about that. We want someone plugs in their laptop, that HDMI should automatically pop up on the screen. We don't want them to have to fuddle with the UCI in order to get their content on screen. We want to update the labels to warn users when a laptop is disconnected. I don't want them pressing a button on the UCI that says laptop 2 if laptop 2 is not there. That sounds terrible. We're going to display a graphic when the laptops are disconnected. And then also, we've got that wireless presentation. That's got some information that the user might need. We're going to put that information on the UCI, but we're only going to put that information on the UCI when someone has chosen that source to be on one of the screens. If no one's using that wireless presentation, then I don't want to confuse people with that data on the UCI. So we're going to hide that. OK, so let's go back to our design. We'll jump into our script. And we're going to make use of those two LEDs that we brought in earlier that tell us if the laptop 1 is connected or laptop 2 is connected. So we'll go on down here, and I'll say, hey, when laptop 1 is active, so we need a little if statement to validate that it is indeed active, right? So I'll grab my flow control. If laptop 1 is Boolean, you've done that before. Then what are we going to do? We're going to use the function that we just made, right? That's what makes this so easy. We're going to reroute the video and update the UCI. So we're going to say number 1 is going to change. We don't need these inputs here. What do we need to send to it? Well, I'm going to say, hey, I want to send it to the laptop 1, and I'm going to change it to HDMI 1. That code is complete right there. When laptop 1 connects, we run our function and we change those bits of data. Really, really easy, right? You can see how quickly these functions we made can be used to our advantage to make life easier later on. Now, I will say this. I've said before that if you're going to do something twice, you make it a function. Same is true with variables. If you're going to reference something multiple times, make it a variable. Because variables also act as constants, right? A constant is basically a label you can use to refer to something that you can use that label multiple times. I'm already at a point right now where I'm using laptop 1 as a string here, and I'm using laptop 1 as a string here. Frankly, it would probably be a good idea whenever you start writing a script to make a bunch of constants to reference things that you might otherwise accidentally mistype. If I had made a mistake and I didn't include the space here in laptop 1, this wouldn't work. And as we go down this path, if I'm going to use laptop 1 or HDMI 1 potentially multiple times later on, I'm really introducing a lot of points of possibility where I could get something wrong. And even more importantly is with this, we're really kind of hard coding the idea that no matter what, laptop 1 will always be on HDMI 1. It's possible that this room will get shuffled around in the future and they're going to rearrange the HDMI connections. If that's the case, I don't want to have to go through my entire script and re-update every single instance of laptop 1 and HDMI 1. I'd rather do that from one source of truth. So at the very, very top, probably the best thing that I should have done is create a bunch of global variables that will act as constants. And rather than add those labels in my array like I did up here, I'm going to just call this laptop 1 here, I'm going to make another variable that's called laptop2, and I'm going to make another one that's called wireless, a fourth one that's called logo, and yes, the string for each of these is the same as the name that I'm giving them. But now, whenever I reference them, I can reference the variable instead of the string. And that's just going to make a little bit more sense when I use them multiple times later on, because it lets me change them in one place without changing them everywhere. I honestly would probably want to do that with this array of actual names too, but in this case, it's most important for my friendly names because I'm realizing I'm using them down here, right? So I would use my laptop one instead of my friendly name. And if I continue down this mentality, I would do the same thing with the actual name. So that's something to think about. It also opens up your script to the possibility of easily renaming these. Like I said, what if laptop 1 and laptop 2 aren't the right names and you want to rename them to blue cable and red cable because that's more descriptive of what's in the room? Now you can do that from a single place in the script right up here rather than going through it the whole way. So using variables as constants, that's a pretty good housekeeping as a coder to consider whenever you start writing a script. Put all your variables and constants in a single place and reference them later on. Okay, so going back down to our event handler for that laptop 1 active, what happens if the laptop isn't connected? If I want to say, if it's not connected, I want to show the graphic in the room, right? I would do the exact same thing. Just copy this function, paste it right here. We're going to change number 1 to the logo, and we'll change this one to graphic 1 or whatever variable we used for that. Super, super easy. Now, probably at this point, you can extrapolate. If you wanted to go further with this mentality, you certainly could. Like, what if you disconnect laptop 1, but laptop 2 is connected? Then you maybe want to change the left display to be a duplicate of laptop 2. Same thing with laptop 2. If that one disconnects, but laptop 1 is present, maybe you want laptop 1 to be over on display 2. That's just a bunch of if-then statements at this point. You can probably figure out how to do that on your own if that's something you're interested in. If both of them are disconnected, maybe some other graphic shows up, whatever it is, I'm going to trust that you can find that along the way. Let's think about some other automation in the room that maybe you haven't seen yet. One of them, for instance, is updating those labels like I talked about. If the laptop 1 is disconnected, I don't want it to say laptop 1 on the UCI. I want it to give them like a warning that says HDMI is disconnected. If we were doing this with discrete toggle buttons, like I had mentioned we could have done earlier on, it could have been a fun way to disable a button that doesn't have a connection valid. That could be one way to do it. You can't really disable an option within a list box. You can remove items from an array, but that could get a little complicated here. Instead, I just want to update the label to change what it displays to them. So let's go back up to the top, and let's make another variable. We'll call this one our HDMI warning, and we'll have this say HDMI is disconnected. And what we're going to do is we're going to insert that into our arrays when we have a disconnected HDMI. Now, I could do this by adding the logic into the laptop 1 event handlers like we just did, but let's make a little function out of it to keep it isolated from the rest of our script. That way we can run that script however often we need to. So let's make a new function that's going to be called refresh labels. And what are we going to do? We're going to do something based on whether laptop 1 active Boolean is connected. And we'll do another one based on whether laptop 2 active is Boolean. And so what are we going to do? We're going to set a different name in our array of friendly names. We can do that by going to the arrays block. There's one that's called in array of whatever customizable array you need, set number something as something else. This is another way to build an array, essentially. You can build things on the fly. So if it is Boolean, then in the array of friendly names, I will set number 1 as the laptop 1 that we normally want. But if it is not Boolean, then we're going to, in that array, change it to be the HDMI warning. And we'll do the exact same thing down here. If laptop 2 is present, but this time it's going to be for number 2, for laptop 2. And if it's missing, we're going to change number 2 to HDMI warning. And then after we've made that analysis, all we need to do is re-update our UCI controls to reference this new adapted array that we've made changes to. And you saw how we did that previously, right? We just used these controls right here, set control choices to. I'm going to put that at the bottom of this refresh function so that after it checks, it will update both of the displays to the new thing. And now that is done. And now I'm going to collapse that block, and I will simply recall this function as part of my event handler for when that laptop changes. I've moved the refresh labels to be the first thing that happens when the LED changes. Why? Because remember, it's using that label to look up our arrays. And if it's trying to find the phrase HDMI is disconnected when it's doing our conversion tools, it's not going to find it. So I move the refresh labels to the top of the code. So the first thing it does is re-update and know that the arrays are in line with what the actual system is doing. And then it runs through the rest of our script and it works properly. You know what? I was talking earlier about how I would, if I really wanted to do this the right way, I would change all of these other strings into variables as well. But you know what? I actually realized I can do it even easier than that because I don't need these strings at all. I can just use that function that I made that converts a friendly name to an actual name. I can do that for both of these and just use that laptop 1 and spit it in there. That way it doesn't necessarily need to be hard-coded to HDMI 1 or graphic 1. It'll just look it up in the arrays like I wanted it to. Anyways, let's duplicate this for the second laptop. I'll right-click, duplicate the second thing. When laptop 2 changes, then we're going to look at laptop 2's Boolean and say we're going to change number 2. We're going to change laptop 2, both here and there. Laptop 2, logo. We are done. Piece of cake. Let's see if it works. Go back to our UCI. And if I disconnect HDMI 1, then boom, on our UCI, it warns us, hey, don't pick on this because there's nothing there. Disconnect HDMI 2. Look at that, same warning. We can update that warning really, really easily inside the code and make that happen. Plug it back in, fixes our labels for both laptop 1 and laptop 2.